media, greetings from Kiev. As you can see, I'm in a bomb shelter of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The reason for it is that about an hour ago an air raid siren was on in Kiev, so we didn't know for how long it would last. We moved my office and camera to the shelter. Now, thanks God, the siren is over, but I didn't want to delay the briefing, so I'm addressing you from here. Today I will update you on the most important developments in Ukraine and beyond, and then answer some of your questions. You may get less headlines about Russia's war against Ukraine right now. Since the liberation of Kherson, there have not been major frontline developments. But the truth is that the war drags on. Combat continues along the entire front line. At some spots, Ukrainian forces are slowly improving their positions, while at the other ones, Russians try to advance at an incredibly slow pace and without much success. Now, on the issue of mass missile strikes on Ukraine's critical civilian infrastructure, Russia has made 6 such massive strikes since October 10th. The aim is to destroy the Ukrainian energy system and leave millions of people without access to power, water, and heating amid freezing temperatures. Putin himself openly admitted that Russia strikes the Ukrainian energy system on purpose. We have been crystal clear. These strikes are war crimes and genocide. Article 2C of the Genocide Convention describes such actions as, I quote, inflicting unbearable conditions of life on a national group to destroy it in full or in part. We will hold Russian criminals to account for these crimes. It is also clear that such barbarism is Russia's response to losing the war on the battleground. They have suffered a number of humiliating defeats and lost a lot of the temporarily occupied land. They cannot compete with our army in the long run and wage a cowardly war on civilians instead. Putin hopes that without power, water and heating, Ukrainians will stop resisting and accept Russian ultimatums, but this is a grave miscalculation. Russian missile terror will not break Ukraine down. It only makes people more determined to defeat the aggressor. And it also makes us very resilient. We will, after this war ends, Ukrainians will be #1 in the world in resilience. Russia wants to plunge Ukraine into darkness, but the real darkness is Russia itself. They will not achieve any military aims with their missile terror against civilians. What they will, though, and have already achieved, is the status of the world's most barbarians of the 21st century. Nevertheless, the winter is difficult for our people. Our energy system is severely damaged, and we need the support of our partners to keep it functional. Today in Paris, an important event was held, an international conference called In Solidarity with the Ukrainian People. End of quote. Ukrainian and French leaders Volodymyr Zelensky and Emmanuel Macron initiated this new format of cooperation that brings together partners and friends of Ukraine all over the globe to help us survive the winter, restore and protect our energy system from Russian terrorists. The meeting was a huge success, and I thank all states and entities that took part in it, making important contributions and coordinating efforts to help Ukraine withstand winter and aggression. Paris conference proves that our solidarity is stronger than Russian terror. Countries who took part in the conference made very specific commitments counting in hundreds of millions of euro to help maintain, restore and uphold Ukraine's energy system in the coming weeks and months of this harsh winter. We appreciate their contributions. In his address to the conference, President Zelensky listed some very specific needs of Ukraine to keep our energy system afloat. These are transformers, equipment for restoring high-voltage networks, gas turbine and gas piston power units. And don't get surprised that I know all of these terms. I had to learn them. Or it will be fair to say life forced me to learn them. He also called on the EU states to ensure imports of electricity from the EU to Ukraine to cover the deficit. The President emphasized the need to send special missions to the objects of Ukrainian critical energy infrastructure. Another specific way to ensure Ukrainian needs is the purchase of additional volumes of gas and a large effort to save power by using LED lamps. But most importantly, President Zelensky called on setting a special permanent mechanism for coordinating efforts, the Paris mechanism. This will make it possible to provide timely and effective responses to every challenge of Russian energy terror. We call on all partners to make their contributions to save lives of civilians in Ukraine. And we are grateful, as I said, to those who have already made important steps in that regard. Today, I have reasons to thank many colleagues, foreign ministers who announced contributions, and all of them were made in Paris. It's very important that this mechanism is functioning now. Apart from the energy aid, of course, Ukraine still needs more weapons and ammunition, because the best way to protect our civilians from Russian terror is to defeat Russia. We have already received a lot of security assistance from our partners, and we will always be grateful for all of it. However, given the scale of the war and Russia's unwillingness to accept the reality and withdraw from Ukraine, we will need to fight through the winter. And for that, we need more air and missile defense systems and ammunition, armored vehicles, primarily tracked ones, and a very important need that I want to emphasize is additional 155 millimeter artillery cannons and ammunition. This war is largely an artillery war, and Ukraine needs more cannons to be able to stop the Russian offensives and to continue with its own counteroffensives. One important topic I want to touch upon today is the way to peace. From time to time, Russian officials make empty statements saying they are presumably ready for talks. No one should be fooled. Russia has not changed its ultimatums and still wants to conquer all of Ukraine. What they want right now is not peace, but a pause in aggression to continue it later. We will not play this game. Ukraine wants peace as no other nation in this world, but we want real peace, just peace, lasting peace, not another delayed war. In fact, none of our international partners are interested in a protracted or frozen conflict. This is why President Zelensky proposed Ukraine's peace formula of 10 steps. This is the path to putting an end to Russian aggression, restoring peace, and strengthening respect for international law. 10 elements include nuclear safety, food security, energy security, release of all prisoners and deported persons, implementation of the UN Charter and restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity, full withdrawal of Russian troops and cessation of hostilities, restoration of justice, countering ecocide, preventing escalation, and ensuring that aggression does not repeat. We call on all states to support President Zelensky's peace formula. Every nation can choose elements of the formula and work together with Ukraine on implementing them. An important detail, we plan to engage not only European but other nations in the global south, so that the peace formula becomes a universal, not only Western vision for peace. We plan to hold a global peace formula summit to implement it. We believe that this initiative should become a global format. The peace formula opens a window of opportunity for every country and leader to show political leadership on the regional and world stage. Now, before we turn to questions, I would like to highlight Ukraine's position on a few specific developments beyond Europe. First, we go to Peru. Ukraine closely follows events in the Republic of Peru and condemns any actions that contradict the country's constitution and the rule of law. We welcome the unity and efforts of the Peruvian authorities aimed at a peaceful and democratic solution. We look forward to constructive cooperation with the new leadership of Peru for the sake of further strengthening of our bilateral relations. Second, on Brazil. Ukraine is looking forward to furthering mutually beneficial cooperation with the new government of Brazil, headed by the President-elect Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. We expect more active support from Brazil vis-à-vis Russian aggression against Ukraine. During previous presidential terms of President Lula, Ukraine and Brazil initiated a number of important projects in different areas, and bilateral relations were elevated to the level of strategic partnership. We look forward to further developing it. Third, on Australia and New Zealand. We appreciate the strong stance and unwavering support from our partners in the Indo-Pacific region. On December 10th, Australia announced targeted sanctions in response to Iranian and Russian human rights violations and invasion of Ukraine. We welcome these steps by the Australian government. On December 12th, Foreign Minister of New Zealand, Nanaia Mahuta, announced a further round of sanctions on 23 individuals who are supporting the illegal Russian invasions. New sanctions are targeting individuals and networks behind disinformation campaigns that support the Putin war effort. Here too, I'm grateful to our partners in New Zealand. These actions prove that distance doesn't matter when it comes to standing up for what is right, for international law, human rights, and the UN Charter. Last but not least, we have closely followed the visit of Chinese leader to Saudi Arabia. We see it as a unique event aimed at building up strategic bilateral and regional partnership, and we call on our Arab and Chinese partners to use all their political weight and influence to deter Russia from further war crimes against Ukraine and to bring Russia back to the tenets of international law. We encourage our Arab and Chinese partners to increase humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. Furthermore, we count on the important support of Ukrainian humanitarian initiatives, such as the Grain from Ukraine, launched by President Zelensky, and also our resolutions pending adoption in international organizations. Thank you for your attention, and now the most interesting part for you, I guess. I'm ready to answer your questions.
Let's start with our Polish friend, Agnieszka. You're with us, so please take your time.
Good afternoon, Minister. Agnieszka Laskowska, Polsat News. We talk a lot about support which is given to Ukraine from other countries. You talk a lot about this support. But when you talk with foreign politicians out of sight of cameras, do they tell you that Ukraine should think of sitting behind the negotiation table, should think of negotiating peace in talks instead of battlefield?
No. A short answer to the question is no. We know that some feel tempted to launch this conversation, but they know how Ukraine would react, and therefore they do not launch it. They do not try to launch this conversation.
Okay, next one is Emmy McKinnon from Foreign Policy.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Foreign Minister. I have two questions, if I may. My first is Microsoft, in a recent report about Russian cyber attacks on Ukraine, but also on neighboring countries, said that they expect a potential increase in Russian cyber activity over the winter as they're struggling in the battlefield. I'm wondering if you can kind of give us an overview of what your expectation is, what your preparations are for the cyber aspects of this war. And then secondly, you mentioned China earlier. I'm wondering, are you reaching out to Beijing directly to discuss the reality of what's happening in Ukraine, and are you, have you tried to encourage them to lean on the Russians in any way? Thank you.
We do expect that Russia will be doing everything it can to step up pressure on Ukraine at all fronts. And not only on Ukraine, but also on the partners of Ukraine. They will not waste any opportunity to weaken Ukraine and support it receives. And definitely cyberspace is one of them. So apart from classic cyber attacks, we expect more attempts to discredit Ukraine in the cyberspace. I mean, first of all, on the social media and in a global online kind of news network. So all of this will be happening. For Russia, cyberspace is a battlefield. The good news is that they failed to destroy, they failed to succeed in the cyberspace in the very first days of the aggression, as they equally failed on the battlefield, because it turned out we were pretty good together with friends in countering their cyber attacks. So I think we will manage this one too, but it would be very important to have global tech companies, including Microsoft, on our side in defending the cyberspace, not only of Ukraine, but also of all other countries who will be targeted by Russian attacks. On China, yes, we do maintain direct dialogue through our embassies. I spoke with the foreign minister of China on the margins of the UN General Assembly. I was looking forward to speak with him at the ASEAN summit earlier in, I think, November. Yeah. But the meeting didn't take place, not because some of us didn't want it to take place, but because foreign minister was not present at the summit. So yeah, we are always open to this communication because we do believe that China can play a role in making Russia withdraw from Ukraine.
Next one, David Brennan.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Minister, for holding this briefing. My first question, President Zelensky has said that he is hoping for victory sometime next year. Is that an assessment that your partners in NATO, primarily in the US, share? And is there still a danger of any major Russian offensives going through winter and into the new year, or do you assess that their offensive capabilities are exhausted? Thank you.
Well, we hope and we do everything that depends on us to end this war as soon as possible with our victory and with the liberation of Ukrainian territories. It's difficult to set up any deadlines, of course, but we are doing our best, and if it happens in summer, that of course would be a great news. President is basing his assessment on the dynamics of the war, on the assessment of military capacity of both sides, and on the level of support that is coming from our partners to help to support us to support our armed forces. When you are asking about the assessment of foreign intelligence, I think it's better, and foreign governments, I think it's better to ask them directly that question. When it comes to the second question was? No, there was a second part in this question.
You can repeat
Yes, it was about the Russian capability.
Capability. Yes, I think the Russian capability to conduct an offensive may be a large offensive, may be restored somewhere by the end of January, February, but that's what they're trying to do. And we, of course, do everything possible to prevent it from happening. So I'm not saying for certain that this is happening, but in the best case scenario, taking the mobilization, the conscription they have, taking into account the conscription they have announced and the training of new conscripts and the movement of their heavy weapons across the country, they definitely still keep hopes that they will be able to break through our lines and advance deeper in Ukraine. We do everything to prevent it from happening. And I firmly believe that we will succeed, and they won't be able to move any further into Ukraine.
Next, Romania, Laura Stefanescu. The floor is yours. Can you please switch on your mic because we don't hear you?
Laura, please switch on the mic. I cannot hear you. I can read your lips, but I cannot read the words.
Okay, yeah,
Yes.
thank you. Mr. Kuleba, thank you. Your Excellency, this year, winter time is a very challenging period for the Ukrainian people. There is increasing tragedy for civilians with no electricity, no water, no heating. There are still difficult military pressure on you. In such kind of dilemmatic challenges, which is your request to your friends to focus on? To economic, energy, and humanitarian help, or to military support, taking into consideration including the huge difficulties experienced by majority of the European people?
By launching massive missile attacks on Ukraine, Russia turned entire country into a front line. So it doesn't matter whether you are a soldier or a civilian, you are under attack. And that's how we feel. So, and that makes help provided to our army and to our energy infrastructure almost equally important, so to say. So of course, I always put weapons in the first place because we are fighting a war, but the distance between the first and the second place, or the difference between them, is very narrow, and energy equipment goes in the second place. Everyone is facing difficulties. It's not only people in Europe, but the repercussions of this war are felt globally. Take food security, for example, or energy security. What we should be crystal clear on is on a very simple message that has to reach the people, reach every household, that everything bad that is happening has only one source. It's the Russian aggression against Ukraine. There will be temptation to misinterpret the reality and to say that it's sanctions to blame, it's Ukraine to blame because it didn't give up on time before Christmas or before winter season, or NATO to blame. This is all Russia. These are all Russian narratives. People have to understand that the real problem of the world has one name, and it's Russia. And the sooner this war ends with Ukraine winning and Russia returning to its place and respect for international law, the sooner the problems of the people will end. We can talk about COVID, about the dynamics of economic recession caused by the fight against COVID. This will also be true, but it would have been much easier to fight recession, to handle recession caused by COVID pandemic if Russia did not attack Ukraine.
Let's go to Colombo, Sri Lanka. Nilanta, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Honorable Minister. I hope I'm audible to you.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thanks. India has decided not to support the price cap on Russian oil. May I have your take, please?
You know, anything price cap causes twofold reaction in Ukraine. On the one hand, it's a good mechanism. On the other hand, we believe that the threshold established, the price threshold, the cap itself established by this mechanism is way too high. Every country has a right what to do for its economy to benefit. This is something that governments have to decide something that governments have to decide on. But the message that we are conveying to our Indian partners is very simple. You have the opportunity to buy cheap Russian oil. Russia is selling you cheap oil because it stands under enormous pressure from sanctions and other types of pressure. And the reason why it found itself under pressure is the aggression against Ukraine. So if you take this element into account and you still continue to buy Russian oil, then as a balancing act, you begin to support Ukraine more heavily in a more extensive way, because you understand that you can enjoy the benefit of buying cheap Russian oil because someone in Ukraine is dying because of the Russian aggression. As cynical as it sounds, but when I hear pragmatic excuses why we have to continue buying Russian oil, fine, I will respond to your pragmatic excuse with a very pragmatic explanation of how your foreign policy, how it would be fair, pragmatically fair for your foreign policy to look like.
Now, United Arab Emirates, Baal Badran. You can ask your question yourself, just switch on. Okay, before Wael is with us, let's go back to Britain to David Parsley. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Hi, Minister. Thank you very much for taking up the questions. Yesterday, I've just got a couple. Yesterday, Boris Johnson called on the UK government to send long-range weapons to Ukraine to allow Kiev to target Russell missile launch sites in Russia. Would you back that call, or are there different weapons you require more urgently? And my second question, Western intelligence officials have suggested to the UK and US media that the West could back the beginning of peace talks if Russia retreated to its positions as of the 23rd of February. Is that on the table at all? And then those areas such as Crimea that Russia would still then occupy be up for negotiation? Thank you.
Yes, I can easily back the call to provide Ukraine with long-range weapons. We need it to strike targets in the military infrastructure and military targets of Russia in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. That would help us to destroy the second and the third layers of military infrastructure Russia has built in the newly occupied territories of Ukraine. A part of that, I think, the weapon that we need the most now is, of course, as I said in my opening remarks, it's more of 155th caliber howitzers, cannons, whatever you call them, because this war is largely an artillery war, and Russia still dominates on the battlefield when it comes to the amount of cannons it is using and the number of shells these cannons are firing. So we urgently need many more cannons to keep the situation at the front line stable, both when it comes to that part of the front line where we are in defense and to that part of the front line where we are on the counteroffensive. The answer to your question is simple. The territorial integrity of Ukraine is non-negotiable. Any decision or any end game in this, any diplomatic end game will be based on Russia withdrawing from all territories of Ukraine as of 2014.
A few last ones from Poland to wrap up. Let's go to Tomasz David Jedrucho from TVP.
Hello, good evening. Greetings from Kiev. As you can see, we are enjoying this evening without electricity, thanks to Russians. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. You can come to the foreign ministry. We have a generator. So if you need some light.
Okay, thank you. I think we will manage. We are ready for this. I have two questions. First is about electricity. I hope that you will be able to answer. A few months ago, we were talking Poland and Ukraine about using the power line, which is connecting Chmielnicka atomic electric plant to connect it with Poland. There was some kind of information from Polish side that works will be finished by the end of the year. Now we had an information that this line can be used both to export the electricity, which is not possible now, but also to import the electricity from Ukraine Union. So the question is, are you able to tell us on what state now we are? When can we expect that this line will be, we can use it to help and support Ukraine? So this is the first question. And second one is that about the humanitarian aid. From Poland, we have a giant, enormous number of individuals that are trying to deliver humanitarian aid. I'm not talking about the foundations and the big organizations, but private people who are coming and they are spending a giant amount of time waiting in lines on the border. They are asking us who can help them with dealing with this. Because when we were asking our Prime Minister during visiting Mr. President Zelensky, they told us that there will be new border crossing. It doesn't solve the problem when private people who are coming on Friday evening and want to come back on Sunday evening home, they spending like 5 or 10 hours on border, even when they have documents from the organizations or military units that they help. Who can help them with saving this issue, that they have to spend giant amount of time on the border crossing? Thank you.
Well, as regards your first question, Ukraine was until mid-October a big exporter of electricity to the EU market, and we were working on the expansion of exports. And the line that you're talking about from the Chmielnicki line was aimed at expanding export of Ukrainian electricity to the European Union. Now, as a result of the destruction of our energy infrastructure, we became the importer of EU electricity. And now we are trying to buy electricity from the European Union to balance our energy system in the coming weeks and months during the winter. I do not have an exact answer to your question because it's very specific, and I have to ask my colleague, Minister of Energy, what is the state of play with the upgrade or the restoration of this electricity line. But the plan was to launch it at least in the plan before Ukraine turned from being an exporter to being an importer. The plan was to launch this line in at least a test mode somewhere in December. That was the plan. But I don't know where it stands now in light of the recent developments. The answer to your second question is very simple. You know, the only sustainable solution to this problem is the end. Well, if you put the end of the war as such aside, the only sustainable solution is unfortunately the opening of new checkpoints, because neither Ukrainian nor border infrastructure, nor the border infrastructure of our neighbors was designed to accommodate this flow of both civilians and businessmen crossing the border in both sides. So it's fair to say that even if we remove all the facilitate all the procedures, the bottleneck will still be there, because the number of people trying to cross in or out of Ukraine is too high. Now that the airspace is closed, you can only do it by rail or by car, by railway or by car. On our side, the Ukrainian government lifted all the custom fees for the import of energy generators to make it easier to bring this into these items in Ukraine. But logistically, this is happening not because someone is creating obstacles or hindrances. This is happening because of the number of people trying to cross the border. When I travel, for example, when I go on a business trip and I approach the border, it's the same. I see the same line of trucks, small buses, commercial buses, and passenger cars waiting from both sides. It's the reality that we have to face. Maybe someone smarter can give you a better solution to this situation, but I think that only the full facilitation of procedures from both sides of the border is the way to ease the problem, but the way to solve the problem is building brand new border infrastructure and building it on the principle of joint control. It's something that we proposed to Poland, by the way, to launch joint control on existing and new border checkpoints. That would significantly facilitate the procedures.
One last one from Agnieszka, and then we go.
Again?
Yeah, just
Just a short one. Minister, you've mentioned prisoners of war, you've mentioned civilians being detained in Russia. Do you have exact numbers, and do you have any hope that they will be home for New Year's Eve or for Christmas? Thank you.
We are working on on prisoner swap on a regular basis. The moment the first prisoner swap takes place, we are already working on the next one. So, but life and the war taught me that the issue of prisoner swaps is extremely sensitive, and I do not want neither to give hope nor to kill hope of when exactly it will happen. But we are working right now. We are working on a prisoner swap with Russia, and we want it to take place as soon as possible. Sir?
I see one from Germany, but
okay, one you can let's
okay, one last one from Germany, who just joined us, and then we go.
Thank you. I would like to know, do you expect new attacks with drones and missiles, and as a result, people to flee from Ukraine to Germany and other countries this winter?
It's interesting. You are the second German journalist in 3 days whom I'm talking with, and you are asking the same question. Yes, there will be more strikes. I think people of Ukraine, they will first and foremost try to stay in the country and maybe move to the countryside or to western regions of Ukraine. But some of them will, of course, cross the border. But before reaching Germany, there are other countries on their way. As I see it, people who are now in Ukraine, they have lived through some very difficult months and situations, and if they didn't leave Ukraine by now, they will not have the intention to leave the country and stay abroad on a long term. I cannot decide for everyone. This is everyone's choice. But I think that this potential wave of people who may leave Ukraine, they will not try to settle in other countries. They will return home immediately after the supply of electricity to their houses will be restored. So you have to differentiate between those who left in the very beginning of the war and settled temporarily, but they are still in your countries, and those who have been in Ukraine through all of this nightmare, and they know how they are resilient, they know how to live with it. So they may only leave their houses for this short period of time until our energy experts will be restoring the system.
Thank you. This is
Thank you. Bye-bye.